Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to League of Legends In Depth. In today's episode, we're talking about armor and magic penetration. In the previous episode, we talked about the armor and magic resistance mechanics just in general. Now we're talking about armor and magic penetration. And in the next episode, if you haven't already guessed, we're going to be comparing flat damage runes versus armor penetration runes and flat magic or AP runes versus magic penetration runes to kind of see which one is more efficient. But today we need to talk about penetration. This was actually the most requested topic from the previous episode, mostly because I said that there was no loss from stacking armor or magic resistance, and the instant was, what about magic penetration or armor penetration? So let's talk about that. The gameplay in the background is me playing some ARAM with Rammus. He builds armor, he stacks magic resistance, he actually deals magic damage, and if I had the time to build all my items, I'd have an Abysmal Scepter, so I'd be dealing a little bit more magic damage with the penetration built into that, but it's a somewhat relevant gameplay because that's about as armory of a character as there is. There are 4 total types of armor penetration and magic penetration. The formulas between the two are identical, so for the purposes of time, we're only going to talk about armor penetration today, and we're going to sum up at the end with a little bit of focus on magic penetration, but do bear in mind that the math works the same way for both of these. There's actually a little bit more than just penetration. There's also reduction, and it goes in an order of operations, just like your addition, multiplication, subtraction, division, your PEMDAS, your rules with the parentheses and all that. There is an order of operations to how the game calculates it. The first thing it does is a flat armor reduction. The next step is the percentage armor reduction. Step after that is percentage armor penetration, which is probably what the title of the episode was, and then we have the flat armor penetration. The big difference between the two is that reduction changes the base stats. If you reduce the armor on an enemy, it physically actually alters their armor and decreases it. Some characters like Rammus, for example, the more armor he has, the more damage he has. If somebody uses armor reduction on me, I'm actually going to be dealing less damage, whereas if they were doing an armor penetration item, it wouldn't actually change my base damage because my armor wouldn't change. It would just change for purposes of calculation. It should also be noted that reduction changes it for everybody, not just for you. So if you have an item or a spell that reduces somebody's armor, it reduces it for the game-wide, like the global game, so your teammates will also be able to do more damage to them, which is very important. The first in our order of operations, the flat reduction, is very simple. If you have an item or a skill or something that's 15 armor reduction, that means negative 15 points of armor to the opponent's base armor. This stacks additively. If you have a 15 and a 5 and then another 5 and then somebody else comes in with a 5, that'll be 30 total armor reduction, or just 30 off of 30 points of armor less. You actually can go negative with reduction. You can reduce it below 0 and get negative armor and be dealing bonus damage, so do keep that in mind if you're dealing with a very low armor opponent. The percentage armor reduction is just a scalar multiplier that reduces armor. It works pretty simply. It's ticking off points of armor, not points of resistance. So let's say you have a 20% armor reduction and your enemy has 100 armor. That means you're actually going to reduce them down to 75 armor. The things to note about this is that it stacks multiplicatively. It's just a basic scalar multiplier. It just multiplies. So if you had 25 and 25, it'd be like 0.75 times 0.75, and you get the answer there. Or if you had just something crazy powerful like a 50% reduction for some reason, and you had 2 of those, that would leave them with 25% total of the armor, or 75% reduction because it stacks multiplicatively. It cannot go negative, whereas the flat armor reduction can go negative. This one cannot go negative. You can't go negative armor on the reduction. The next thing we need to talk about is percentage armor penetration. This is number 3 in our order of operations. It comes after reduction. It mathematically works the same way as the percentage of reduction, except all it's doing is causing the game to calculate damage as if that enemy armor was reduced by a fixed percent. Their actual physical armor value doesn't change, but your particular damage to them does change. Your teammate's damage isn't changing, but yours is, because you are penetrating or ignoring a fixed percentage of that armor. The example that I have here, again, 25% armor penetration equals calculates damage as if the armor's opponent were reduced by 25%, and this is going to be local to you. The last thing we have in the order of operations today is flat armor penetration. It treats the armor as if it were reduced by a base amount. This is the same thing, and this is local to you. This is if you had an item that says, plus 10 armor penetration, or here's my example, plus 15 armor penetration. That means it would calculate damage as if the enemy had 15 less points of armor, and again, this is local to you. Penetration is just local to you. Reduction is for the whole team, for the global game environment. So there's a big difference there. In general, again, armor reduction is going to be preferred because it works for your teammates too. If you can reduce their armor via any spell or item or method, you're going to be doing it globally. So in team fights, anybody that hits that person is going to be dealing more damage. That's why I like Rammus. His taunt spell is a flat armor reduction. I believe it's 30 points of reduction when I max it out, and that's 30 points for everybody on my team. So if they focus that guy or that individual, he gets just shredded very, very fast, very dangerous. And because of the order of operations, there are an ideal choices of effects. There are an ideal way you can do this. There is no downside to having any of these items. There is no downside to any sort of armor or magic reduction whatsoever, but for efficiency reasons, if you can only choose one or two, there is an ideal set to choose from. And the next two examples I have, I'm considering this in mid to late game. Early game very greatly favors flat everything, flat penetration, flat reduction, flat damage increase, no percentage or scalars, but later game is much more important on percentage. So we're going to be focusing on mid to late game. And the first example I have is if you have a low armor enemy or enemies such as an AD carry or an AP mage or something like that, you want to go first some sort of percentage reduction, item or skill or spell, if you're dealing with this at all, that is. This will reduce by the highest value possible, and it'll do it globally for your whole team. The second item you have, which would be the last in our order of operations, is a flat penetration. This is just for you to do damage to somebody else, but what this is going to cause is the biggest reduction up front and then the biggest flat reduction from the smallest remainder, so you're going to be dealing the most damage in this particular area. If you have somebody with high armor or high magic resistance or high health or something like that, you want to go with percentage reduction and percentage penetration, because if the numbers are really high, you want to stack those multiplicative percents and see if we can cut it in half, cut it by 40%, something like that. And if the numbers are really high, you're not going to be able to do that with any kind of flat penetration unless it's really, really high flat penetration. I don't know what particular items would grant something high enough, but when dealing with tanks or fighters or something, you want percentages on both. And again, if you're dealing with a mage or lower armor enemy, you want a percentage reduction and then a flat penetration. Thankfully for us, magic penetration and reduction works the exact same way. A lot of you were frustrated in the last episode, said it was wrong, that magic has its own formula, but the magic resistance works the same way that armor does, and similar, that's been patched recently now. The magic penetration and magic reduction work the exact same way the armor does, so the same things we just discussed with armor are relevant to magic. So if you are if you run a mage and you want to know what's better, if you want to know if you should be using magic penetration or magic reduction or what's more effective, do the exact same thing, just skip back in the episode but drop magic in place of armor, and there you go. Well guys, that's all for this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you learned something useful. If you'd like to check out the previous episode, that's a link down there in the description. The next episode is going to be comparing flat AD runes versus armor reduction, or flat AP versus magic reduction. They're going to come out very similar, I can promise you on that one, because the formulas are, again, very similar. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. And if you haven't played League of Legends, it's free to play. There's a link down there in the description. You can check that out. Drifter out.